the FAIC. Go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. Hello, and thanks to everyone for joining us for today's program on how to protect against risks to tribal cultural heritage. This program is made possible with the generous support of the Department of the Interior. My name is Jessica Unger, and I'm the Emergency Programs Coordinator at the Foundation of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. FAIC undertakes and underwrites programs and initiatives to advance the conservation profession nationally and internationally in all its facets, and applies the expertise of the profession in addressing global artistic, cultural, and historic preservation priorities. FAIC promotes the preservation of cultural heritage as a means towards a deeper understanding of our shared humanity, the need to express ourselves through creative achievements in the arts, humanities, and sciences. We honor the history and integrity of these achievements through the preservation of cultural materials for future generations. Today's program is the third and final webinar in a series that has discussed the risks that can potentially affect the cultural resources of tribes. Cultural resources are defined as the aspects of a cultural system that are valued by, are significantly representative of, a culture, or that contain significant information about a culture. A cultural resource may be a tangible entity or a cultural practice. Tangible cultural resources are characterized as structures, archaeological resources, cultural landscapes, museum collections, archival documents and photographs, sacred sites, and ethnographic resources. And as you might expect, this series has primarily addressed tangible cultural resources and how to protect them. On Monday, we discussed the principles of risk assessment and how to size up the risks to your collections. You can view a recording of that program by following the link that I'm about to provide in the comment box. On Tuesday of this week, we looked at the workings of the Emergency Management Division of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we learned about how to collaborate with emergency professionals. Oops, sorry, the link for the previous program didn't go through. So there's the recording for Monday's program on assessment. And then again on Tuesday, we looked at the workings of the Emergency Management Division of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and really focused on the priorities of collaborating with emergency professionals in order to best protect collections. So a recording of that program is available by following the link that I'm now sharing in the comment box. Today, we are learning about how to build a preparedness plan. All of the programs featured in this webinar series are designed to highlight the unique needs of tribes in emergencies. For today's program on preparedness, we're fortunate to be joined by Alexandra, or Alex, Allardt. Alex is Principal and Managing Director of ArtCare Resources, an independent collection care consultancy firm based in Newport, Rhode Island. After completing her academic art conservation training through the New York State University system in 1974, she headed the Cultural Objects Conservation Laboratory at the Pacific Regional Conservation Center in Honolulu, working with 64 cultural centers throughout the Pacific Basin to identify collection needs and priorities and to implement preservation plans. In 1976, she became involved in her first cultural disaster response, protecting a Hawaiian church in the face of lava flows from the volcano Kilauea. In 1978, she relocated to the East Coast to head the conservation laboratory at Harvard University's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography, overseeing the preservation needs of its 3 million object collection. In pursuit of her passion to help small, undersourced museums, historic sites, and tribal agencies problem-solve their collection preservation challenges, she began a private practice in 1980 dedicated to helping cultural organizations successfully achieve cost-effective preservation strategies and action plans that best utilize limited resources. Alex works within New England with the Narragansett, Nipmuc, Mohican, and Wampanoag tribal authorities on collections care, and was instrumental in overseeing the preservation needs for the traveling exhibition Gifts of Love and Pride, Kiowa and Comanche Cradles, and the exhibition on Toma Joseph, a traditional Passamaquoddy birch bark artist. In 2004, she became a certified member of the National Heritage Responders, formerly known as AIC CERT, and she has been training cultural organizations on emergency management since then. Alex, we're thrilled to have you here with us today. I'm going to go ahead and remove my slides.
Thanks, Jess.
And turn it over to you.
There we go. Thank you very much. And greetings to everyone out there in cyberspace. And again, as Jess said, welcome to Protecting Tribal Cultural Heritage. This one's on preparedness, the third in the webinar series. And if you haven't participated in the other two, do check them out because this webinar builds upon the first webinar on risk assessment and the second webinar on collaboration. The goals of this webinar are to share online and published planning resources for making your preparedness plan. The resources are just a few finger clicks away. They will walk you through what information to gather, leveraging what you have learned from the other webinars, and how to organize the information logically and systematically. I'll show you an online template too that guides you through customizing that information into a written pocket response emergency plan. It's sort of cute. I'll also highlight information that is unique to tribal heritage preparedness and then share a user-friendly resource for collaborating with first responders. So let's get started. Let me summarize by what I mean when I refer to tribal heritage or cultural resources. You all know all tribal nations have cultural resources that embody the richness and diversity of your heritage. In Indian country, both tangible and intangible cultural resources are expressions of your heritage. They include sacred grounds, as well as photographs, documents, sound recordings, moving images, and digital materials. There are lots of scrapbooks I've seen, even sometimes rare books and manuscripts, as well as the large variety of artistic, historic, and functional objects. And of course, we can't overlook the archaeological depositories, and sometimes there are even natural science specimen collections. All of them are at risk for catastrophic loss due to emergency disasters. Now, the Heritage Health Index, our national survey done about 10 years ago, found that 80% of collecting institutions in the United States did not have an emergency plan that included collections, especially with staff trained to carry it out. So we hope with these webinars to provide the means for you to be prepared, because what we realize is that making a plan can be confusing and may appear really overwhelming. But let me assure you that there are 3 basic steps that make the process straightforward and really pretty simplified. The first step in planning essentials begins with a tribal commitment to increase the level of emergency preparedness. Now you are expressing that interest by partaking in this webinar. By sharing today's information with your elders, advisory council members, your preservation officers, or other cultural stewards, you will further enhance your overall preparedness. So simply, the key actions for this step right now are to have your cultural institution make preparedness a priority. The easiest way to do that is to appoint a staff member dedicated to completing an emergency plan. And that's a really good starting point. It often begins with your preservation officer or your cultural stewards or keepers. And the second step involves gathering information about possible hazards that could impact your tribal cultural resources and reviewing your capabilities to respond to and recover from a disaster or other emergency caused by that hazard. Now, this webinar provides planning resources and checklists for you to follow to objectively gather information on hazards and risk vulnerabilities. This expands in practical ways upon the first webinar on assessment and keys into the same planning program that Rob Waller identified in his presentation. So remember, your tribal first responders and emergency manager are also excellent resources for gathering and working through this step, okay, and working through this assessment phase. Now, once you've completed the hazard vulnerability assessment, the third step is turning that information into a written plan. An emergency response plan describes the steps you will take to protect your nation's cultural center or museum. It could be your library, your archives, your sacred sites. It could be if you have a separate archaeological repository. And it's what the steps you're going to do before, during, and after an emergency. So the key action for this step is identifying an emergency planning team. That is, those are going to be the people who are responsible for developing the written plan. But frankly, it's the actual act of collaboration that is the most important outcome of this planning process. It helps build a team that ultimately must work effectively together when disaster strikes. So because you've shown a commitment to preparedness by being here, let me guide you through the planning resources that will make this pretty straightforward. We have found from doing this for quite a while that a proven, helpful, and easy to use online resource is the Risk Evaluation and Planning Program hosted at the Foundation for the American Institute of Conservation. The alphabet soup for that is we call it FAIC. And FAIC develops and provides resources and training for collecting institutions and their staffs, such as this webinar and these online resources. So, when you are ready for the first steps to getting prepared, go to the URL address listed at the bottom here of the slide. It will bring you to the page you see on the screen, the home page for the Risk Evaluation and Planning Program, also known as REPP. It gives you a summary of the resource documents available to you. So click on the headings in bold type that I've also circled in red, and it'll take you to the individual document sections. As you become more familiar with navigating the site, and if you are interested in a specific resource, click on the individual titles listed in the yellow box on the right. Either pathway takes you to a page full of helpful resources under each topical heading. Now, the Risk Evaluation and Planning Program has 7 core resource worksheets. They're listed here, and you can choose from any of them. They share tips on a variety of topics helpful in preparing to write your plan. Look over them all to get oriented on the different aspects of the program. I think that's a really good first step. They include tips on preparedness, ideas for simple mitigation measures. There's a helpful sheet on the basic contents of an emergency plan, as well as steps for getting started with emergency planning efforts. And used together, when you look at all of them, the resource topics will really round out your planning efforts and really give you a lot of good hints and direction as to how to proceed. So after you've oriented yourself to the content of program listings, the walkthrough checklist that I've highlighted in orange here is a good place to start to gather information. These worksheets provide a checklist of questions that will help you think about your site and guide you through gathering information in an organized process. Questions examine a broad range of policies and procedures and potential facility hazards. And might have a question on what do you do with on-site construction materials to, what your fire door ratings are or water pressure concerns. Where are the utility locations and what's the presence of enunciators and key security boxes? All of the questions help you confirm what you have in place, as well as help you recognize areas that you might not have thought about, or even present some questions that could need further investigation for answers. I really suggest that you print out the checklist to take with you on your walkthrough. You can do the walk around yourself, but a team effort between your tribal emergency manager, your facilities officer, your tribal preservation officer, or keepers, those who directly care for your collection, they all make good partners to do this with. The walkthrough provides really a team building exercise, and it really will help maximize your plan effectiveness, because the questions will raise everyone's awareness on the really range of different types of tasks and information needed to be prepared, and how you can work effectively together, because no one person will really know all of these answers. So it's a good conversation builder. Now, for those of you who may have some of your cultural resources on long-term loan to institutions outside of Indian country, this is a good means to start a conversation with those institutions and to learn about their preparedness steps. What are they? What is in place to protect your belongings in times of an emergency disaster? Another resource that builds upon the walkthrough questionnaire is the risk prioritization worksheets. They will help you identify, think through, and prioritize the man-made and natural hazards external to your site as well as internal to the facility. They also provide the opportunity to continue to build the shared emergency planning knowledge with your team. Now, unusual planning needs that are not specified in these planning documents are those hazards that are inherent in collections themselves. These hazard potentials are often unintentionally overlooked when they enter collections. So identifying what hazards may be lurking on your shelves is part of making a preparedness plan. I'll highlight a few categories to consider as part of your planning efforts. So the first one here, that's a health and safety risk. You can come from preserving fluids and pesticide powders. They have a history of use on Native American cultural resources, especially those made from tanned hides, furs, and feathers. Some contain a combination of heavy metal compounds such as arsenic and mercuric chloride, which are really risky to anyone's health. These pesticides, of which over 150 have been documented and are now banned from use, and many of them have been banned for use for quite a while, but they're still residual in the collections, were used with good intentions to prevent or eradicate infestations before the health and safety hazards were truly understood. So today, detection, containment, and mitigation of those hazards are a current focus for many Native American collections, especially for those that are repatriated or may be part of ceremonial use. So special handling and storage protocols are really advisable when a suggested history or evidence of pesticides are present. A unique concern for tribal nations that are in potentially are in collections are hazardous herbal remedies. These could pose a health and handling risk, especially if they are desiccated and highly concentrated due to aging factors. Now, guidance from elders about cultural practices can alert you to look for herbal or sacred bundles. They may both present a health hazard and require limited access and special cultural protocols to respect their sacred integrity. So collaborating with authorized tribal members to guide how to be prepared to address the needs for the containment or the removal of sacred items or a priority collection concern to include in your preparedness plans. Also, among all tribal nations or native-run cultural organizations, there is a wide range in approaches to exhibiting, storing, accessing, and protecting your cultural resources. Sometimes the native heritage belongings are incorporated with non-Indian country collections as part of their setting, or in some cases are on long-term loan outside of Indian country. If this is reflective of your situation, be aware that 20th and 21st century medicinal kits, often found in historical collections outside of Indian country, can potentially contain controlled substances. such as nitroglycerin, arsenic, strychnine, and sometimes sharp surfaces and needles with pathogens. So ask if there are any pharmaceutical hazards and what preparedness plans are in place to identify and contain these health and safety hazards. Tribal cultural resources can also hold a range of threats that have the potential for spontaneous fire or to explode. Their hazard potential is often unnoticed, as in the other ones, when they enter collections and increases as they age. A high priority hazard is the spontaneous combustion risks associated with deteriorating cellulose-based negatives. The risk attributed to chemical instability is present when storing deteriorating nitrate and acetate negatives and film stock in less than ideal formats. These negatives were used for a long period of time, starting in the 1880s, and can remain hidden in the depths of archives and photography collections. They often are mixed in with the more stable polyester film supports you may be more familiar with since the 1950s. So it's important to identify them and to isolate them following defined protocols. Now, other types of belongings that have ignition mechanisms may retain the potential to explode if they have not been checked or deactivated when they enter collections. If they remain charged, they pose a serious safety risk during an incident response. So when considering your heritage collections, consider looking for firearms, loose black powder, ammunitions, old fire grenades, or equipment from alternative industries such as mining or search and rescue, road flares, and even photographic flash equipment. These items in reality may not be germane to your holdings, but they are examples that could be part of collections outside of tribal nations. So these hazards can be anticipated with some knowledge and some sleuthing. Your preparedness plan is to examine your collections to identify and, if present, contain whatever risk you find appropriately. Another advice is be sure to date and note in your collection management files that they have been deactivated. This will diffuse, so to speak, questions that may arise from future stewards. Now, another category of inherently hazardous collections are made from geological materials, or even raw samples of the rocks themselves. Often the hazardous nature of the material has only become apparent through recent study and health assessments. Sometimes these hazards are not simple to identify by sight. With the use of radon detectors in our homes, you may be aware that some types of geology and fossils naturally emit radiation. A hazardous category to identify in collections, then, are those that emit a level of radiation. If your cultural resources include an archaeological depository, be aware of this invisible hazard and test them with a Geiger counter. Outside of Indian country, inventors were inspired and produced some really imaginative consumer items using this unregulated technology, many examples of which are now part of 20th and 21st century historic collections. Besides scientific equipment and, say, Vaseline glass, a plethora of household goods like this water cooler or the popular collectibles Fiestaware, those dinnerware sets, present a notable radiation hazard. Radium paint was also used on equipment dials, including our watches, but other not so familiar applications of radium paint have been found in early glow-in-the-dark postcards. I've even seen examples outside of Indian country of safety matches, hand cleaner, and chocolates that were advertised as having special boosting powers. Now, another geological element to look for here, to think about. Other creative commercial applications made use of the peculiar physical properties of mercury. Historic furniture with old mirrors often have deteriorated silvering, causing mercury beads to sweat from the surface and lurk as loose beads in the rabbet of the frames. In the manufacture of more mundane functional pieces, loose droplets of mercury were used in light switches and thermostats in houses, even wobbler fishing lures and trunk switches in older cars. Silk fabrics and hats of the 19th century are often inherently contaminated with mercury salts due to the manufacturing process, how those materials were prepared so they could be either made into a hat or woven into silk. Even a raw geological specimen of mercury sulfide, called cinnabar, is one of a number of examples that can decompose and create beads of loose mercury. Another mineral example is asbestos. We probably are familiar with asbestos being a hazardous mineral because it was used in insulation and wall coatings. But are you familiar with its use in art plasters and home goods? If you have very old plaster busts, older taxidermy mounts, or old full-scale dioramas, asbestos could be present. So when you look at these hazards, remember, as a best practice, any cultural resource with a geological component that is identified as a hazard should be clearly marked as hazardous, stored and isolated in suitable containers, and have access, handling, safety protocols specific to the hazard noted on the shelf, with the object, and in your records. So that's an overview of some of the hazards that might be sleuthing on your collections. But as a presenter, I know that you may feel relatively confident about gathering all of this information until you wake up next week and life's distractions have gotten in the way. Should you wish a review or want to share the planning information with others, these online webinar resources hosted by the online community called Connecting to Collections Care are a means to review steps and share resources to get everybody you want to share it with, get them all prepared and on the same page, so to speak. Now, this Connecting to Collections Care, or C2CC, series of webinars called Risk Evaluation, First Steps in Disaster Planning, is a 4-part presentation on first steps in disaster planning. They are free and available as your schedule permits 24 hours a day at the URL address noted here. Divided into 4 90-minute presentations, each webinar builds upon the one before. They all will guide you in gathering and organizing useful information for emergency preparedness for cultural resources. Now, to complement the individual webinars, there are links to online resources such as the Risk Evaluation and Planning Program checklist that I introduced at the beginning of this webinar. One of those links is called Contents of a Basic Emergency Plan. It identifies a framework upon which to place all the information you have gathered together. The document divides the contents of a basic cultural heritage emergency plan into sort of 7 basic chapters. The general information categories addressed in all disaster plans, and you may have some information to add here, and some of these you may have very little, if no, information. Well, we start off with the emergency contact information. This, of course, would be very important and would be your tribal officers, your first responders, cultural stewards, and your response team. Another sort of chapter or slot here is an area for insurance and vendor and supply information. These are the contexts for the services and supplies needed for response and recovery efforts, things you might have to order in quickly, or people you have to call right away and say, you know, get these out, or this is the information I need from you. Please come help. The third area here is a category for preparedness and response instructions. This area identifies procedures for, say, top-rated risks, maybe where your utility shutoffs are or evacuation procedures. Collection priorities are unique to every tribal nation, but an important component to include in every cultural resource plan. So I can't reiterate how important it is for cultural stewards and your preservation officers to look at your collection and decide really what are the few priority pieces I really need to make sure are well protected. In the next little bullet point for this basic plan is the communications heading. This addresses how response team members will receive and provide information among themselves, and it also addresses the procedures for dealing with the press and the public. The next to last category is the information in the heading for policy and review and updating plans. This helps you sustain your preparedness plans and even practice it. It's always nice to have something in there that says, we need to update this plan, look at the contact numbers annually. It's also a nice way to bolster a schedule by saying we will have a tabletop exercise or some sort of training exercise on a certain schedule too. And the last heading is appendices. This addresses the collection salvage techniques. This could be where also a reference to authorized tribal members and restricted access requirements for sacred objects could be identified. This may seem like a lot of information to organize, but let me assure you, there are a number of emergency planning templates available for cultural resources. You just plug in the information. This free online template is hosted by the Council of State Archivists, and it's particularly user-friendly and suitable to small to mid-sized cultural institutions. It provides spaces for distilling all the information needed for the first 24 to 72 hours following a disaster. The website URL to download the template is written on the bottom there. Named the Pocket Response Plan, or PREP, the template is intended to be customized by each institution, each organization, each site, even each building can have one. The information is very systematically organized and on both sides of a legal size sheet of paper. You then trim it, you fold it accordion style into a credit card size, and you can store it in a Tyvek envelope that easily fits into a wallet. That's pretty easy to have something that's pack and go like that, I think. The template is available as a Word document. It lets you fill in the information you need and delete the areas that are not pertinent to your response plan. On side A, this side, is an emergency communication directory. Use this side to input your phone numbers for the individuals, the agencies, your tribal council officers that you are most likely to need to talk to in the first minutes and hours after an emergency occurs. As I said, this could be tribal leaders, maybe your staff, your facility managers, first responders, even your utility agencies, vendors, and other essential individuals or agencies, such as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The second webinar had to do with collaborations and how to work with TAC-G, so I think this would be a good place to put the contact information there. If you have blank space, and chances are you probably will, you can take advantage of it to insert a list of maybe your priority collections, or you can insert a floor plan for reference, a map of the evacuation meetup location, or even the evacuation routes, or other information you may wish to have at your fingertips. The other side contains an emergency response checklist. This is an organized list of step-by-step instructions for personnel that should be taken in those first 24 to 72 hours following a disaster. Now, For small organizations that would rely heavily on outside vendors and first responders to help them with cultural resource needs, this single page is often the heart of your disaster plan. For larger tribal and cultural organizations with more resources to devote to emergency planning and staffing, the PREP plan is a distilled list of the most important tasks to be taken in the first few minutes and is meant to complement, not replace your disaster plan. But regardless of your size, the wallet size format really ensures that tribal leaders and staff have the most essential information with them at all times. Because it's so easy to make, copies can be kept in multiple locations besides your wallet. Easy access locations might be glove compartments, maybe your refrigerator door, desk drawers, or even taped to the emergency supply kit, or your desk phone or your cell phone cover. Now that you know where to download the PREP template, I want to share this homepage of the Connecting to Collections Care webinar series. It was specifically designed to follow for writing your disaster response plan using the PREP template. So again, to go to it, place the URL address in the bottom of the screen, put that into your browser, and it'll take you directly to the webinar. This is a 5-part webinar series. It walks you through the kinds of information to include and where to put it in the PREP plan. I'm hoping by looking at this, some of these titles and phrases may begin to seem familiar to it, and it's not quite so intimidating. Now, there are 3 other resources that are terrific reference and primer tools. I hope that you have them just as sort of a bookshelf reference, if nothing else. They are the Field Guide to Emergency Response, the Emergency Salvage Wheel, and the Salvage Wheel as an app for your cell phone. The user-friendly Salvage Wheel is really an essential resource, whether you have a plan or not. It's a helpful training tool, and it's meant to hang on the back of your door as a grab-and-go reference tool when you evacuate. One side addresses immediate needs for safety and evacuation with a space for 2 or 3 emergency contact numbers. You could also tape a copy of your PREP plan to it, frankly. The other side of the Salvage Wheel has essential information on how to handle and triage a range of wet collection materials. The Salvage Wheels is available from FAIC at their online shop. For those of you who are tech savvy, it's also available as a free download for Apple, Android, and BlackBerry devices. You can search for it by capital E, capital R, capital S, emergency. Now, a final and concise resource I recommend is the Field Guide to Emergency Response. This water-resistant notebook form of a booklet provides clear and practical advice to help you plan and implement initial response and salvage steps. The tab layout provides a helpful planning format with step-by-step instructions tailored to the scope of your emergency. What to do first, whom to call, how to prevent further damage. And it also has fill in the blanks for you to customize the book to your particular site and the particular type of collection materials that you are responsible for. So do look for these. Do have them on site. Now, up to now, I've alerted you to online and published resources or hard copy resources, but they are not your sole resource for preparedness plans. An instrumental and local resource for tribal cultural resources is your tribal emergency manager and first responders. Engaging with your tribal risk responders before an incident occurs is a proactive planning step that keeps your staff and resources safe and minimizes damage and costly repairs. Do keep in mind that when disaster strikes, there is no time during a disaster response to make introductions or advocate for your needs. So do reach out to them. If you're unsure how to establish a relationship, and I know some of you may feel uncomfortable because you may feel you're so small, or maybe you're afraid of having fire hazards or some difficulties in your site, this poster will guide you in ways to make contact with them and the things you can do to pave the way to improve communication and planning. It suggests what first responders need to know from you as a cultural resource and other things you can do to help planning and response go smoothly. So copies are available from FAIC, or the American Institute of Conservation's online shop. I think Jess is going to put some of these links up for you too. When collaborating with first responders, let them know that essential records and many other vulnerable materials can become a total loss and irreparable within 24 to 72 hours, depending on what your climate is, due to the destructive forces of mold or the acidic effects of soot or smoke. This is a time-sensitive response, and it's a really important need that is unique to emergency preparedness planning for cultural resources. It is one of the lessons learned from the recent history of many natural disasters throughout the country. And it's why damage assessments are priorities for cultural stewards and run parallel with the life and safety training that first responders receive. Due to the gravity of catastrophic vulnerability of these materials, you and your staff can aid collection response efforts by establishing the salvage priorities and sharing those needs with first responders. Because since they have access to and control of your site during a response and well before you will be allowed access, they really are your eyes, and they need to know what to look for in their assessment of the site. So as part of your partnership action plan, be sure to share information on collection priorities, any maybe collection hazards you might have, and any limited access or special handling needs. To go along with that information that you can share, be aware that many first responders are unfamiliar with the procedures or responsibilities of collection management or the special needs of your cultural resources. Let them know as collection stewards, you have a fiduciary responsibility for tracking the movement of collections using a process that is similar to their chain of custody training for the process of, say, arson investigations. These protocols are important for them to know if they anticipate helping you with evacuation procedures. They will understand that chain of custody requirement, and that's how you can make a bridge with them over those tracking needs. So I do encourage you, in summary, to make a goal to create a partnership action plan. By working together to understand each other's needs, tribal preservation officers, cultural stewards, emergency managers, and first responders can save essential cultural resources by being able to work more quickly and efficiently, which in turn helps communities recover more quickly and completely and successfully after the impact of an emergency disaster. Because first responders, remember, have control of your site during an emergency, be sure to establish the lines of communication before the incident. This way you will be familiar with who is in command, what the reporting protocols are, and how you will receive reports, information on what is going on inside. Ask, too, how first responders can minimize damage and about what you can do to support their efforts and ensure staff safety. You can review and strengthen evacuation procedures and learn about access needs for your first responders. For example, knowing their anticipated access routes may alert you to ask responders if they could bring fire blankets into the building to cover cases against the damaging and costly effect of airborne soot as they proceed through the building in an attempt to get to the heart of the fire or water damage or whatever the incident is. So we're at the, this draws the presentation to a close, I'm sorry, but I do hope I have inspired you to increase your agility to prepare for and respond to disasters. I encourage you to share today's information, please. Heightened preparation will minimize damage and costly recovery fees. It'll build confidence in your readiness rating and go a long way towards helping protect your tribe's cultural heritage. Most of all, however, I really want to thank you for your time and attention today. I think there may be time to answer questions for another few minutes, but otherwise, if you have questions afterwards as you think about them in the coming days or weeks, feel free to contact me at the above email address. And thank you. And Jess, do you have any questions or anything I can help with?
Just wanted to say thank you so much, Alex, for a wonderful presentation. You've really done a great job of making the process of developing a plan something that feels manageable. And I hope that the attendees on the program today and anyone who views the recording of this on our YouTube channel will likewise feel like they have resources at hand that will help with the process. Again, we're so glad for the opportunity to discuss a wide range of topics over the course of this webinar series. Thankful to Rob Waller, who walked us through some of the principles of risk assessment, to Patrick Vacha for explaining some of the protocols and procedures of emergency managers who work in Indian country, and of course, Alex, to you for this wonderful way to energize folks who have taken part in this series to feel like they have access to developing their own preparedness plans. If anyone does have questions about the program today, of course, do feel free to pop those into the questions and comment box. And as Alex said, if you think of anything after the fact, her email address is here, and I'm going to go ahead and plop mine in the questions and comments box as well for anyone who would like to reach out to me about the webinar series that we've had this week. Short of any other questions, again, I'd like to say thank you to Mike at Learning Times for being such a wonderful host and supportive throughout this process, and of course to the Department of the Interior for providing the funding and guidance throughout this project and making sure that FAIC has been supported in our quest to bring emergency preparedness resources to tribal cultural communities. So thank you to everyone, and if we don't see any questions, which I don't, I will go ahead and sign off. Again, this is Jessica Unger from FAIC, just saying thank you to all and wishing you the best in your preparedness plans.